largely a collection of my writing over 50 years. Um, but when you sit down to do it, it's kind of overwhelming. And first off, I had to write a little bit about myself, although the book is really not about me. But then some of the things I did as a boy, and some of the tragic things I saw in trout streams where I went growing up in Northeast Iowa. So in some ways, it was about me and my travels. But um, um, you just to charge ahead with it. And I had a lot of help. I had a collection, a huge collection of 50 years of writing, Maxie, if you can imagine, and sifted through it to find stories that I felt stood the test of time. So that's how it came together. I had a lot of help from the Anoka Library people who took some of the hard copy and made it digital so I could play with it word-wise. And so, you know, it's just the way it happens. I guess when you're a writer like I am, it just as you are too, you know, it just starts to come out.
Ron Scharas, our guest. If you just joined us, this is the virtual launch of his book, Mostly True Tales, The Great Outdoors, through the Minnesota Historical Society and Press, as he recounts his life in the outdoors and many of the characters that he's met along the way. Ron, you get asked this all the time. How did you get hooked on the outdoors?
Well, I grew up in a family that were outdoor people. My dad loved to fish, and he hunted squirrels. So obviously he worked 6 days a week as a carpenter, but Sundays we were going fishing. More importantly, my mother loved to fish. So there was never an issue there about who's going fishing. We went fishing as a family. And then as I got older, I'd tag along as my dad hunted squirrels, Maxie. And I do remember the first squirrels that I saw him shoot. I cried. I felt sorry for the squirrels.
Which is a natural reaction for young hunters, correct?
Yeah, I grew out of that, and pretty soon he let me carry a single shot 22 that he had as a boy, single shot Marlin lever action 22. You have to pull the hammer back, and he was with me when I got my first squirrel, and then obviously I became the best squirrel hunter in Almaquis County, Iowa. I mean, you probably understood that. And that started it. But my mother's brothers all were anglers, and some of them were fly fishermen. So I learned to fly fish for trout, and hanging around with them. Uncle Bob was one of them. There's a story about Uncle Bob in the book. And then my dad's side, all of his brothers fished, so I had no choice. That's what we did.
I don't think Iowa is being fertile ground for fishing or hunting anything except pheasants and maybe corn-fed deer. Is it?
Well, I grew up in the northeast corner, just south of Rochester, Minnesota, and that's just the same kind of country as Rochester, Winona, limestone bluff country, lots of woods, trout streams. I had several trout streams, one 6 miles from my home in Postville, Iowa, and so that was all available. And there were pheasants not too far away. So a lot of people have the wrong idea about what Iowa was about, but that northeast corner is very, very similar to what Minnesota, southeast Minnesota looks like. So I had plenty to go there.
Ron Scharas is our guest. He's just released a book through the Minnesota Historical Society. But I asked Ron, I hadn't seen Ron for a long time, and I asked him a couple of weeks ago, where you been? I haven't seen you. He said he'd been spending the last 6 months working on a book. And I said, you writing one or you reading one? These are the kinds of things these are the kinds of things that I have to ask Ron about. Ron, you're in North Dakota now, and your career is starting to unfold as a journalist. What was it? Did you know right away that this was going to be something you're in for the long haul? Did you love the outdoors that much? Because, you know, sometimes they say if you love fishing, don't buy a resort. If you love being in the outdoors, maybe don't report on it because you don't get to do what you really love to do, which is hunt and fish. How did that work for you?
Well, I combined it. Actually, I went to Iowa State University and took up fish and wildlife biology. I was going to be a game warden. And when I got to school, the emphasis was on biology, etc. And then you had to take a basic writing course. And so I took that basic writing course, and the bells went off for me. I loved being able to write about some of the things I was learning in class. And I actually sold a story to Outdoor Life magazine when I was a junior in college because of that. And so then the journalism professor suggested I switch to a journalism major and keep my fish and wildlife as a minor. And then my mother, I was the firstborn of 6, so my mother kept everything I did in school. When you're the firstborn, that's what you get. She pulled out a paper from my 4th grade class, Maxie, and Miss Witt was my 4th grade teacher, who wrote at the top, "Ronnie, I think you have the ability to write." And I found that so magical. So that's what I did. It was the greatest advice I got in school, was to switch majors. And then when I graduated, I wasn't North Dakota, Maxie. I went working for the South Dakota Game and Fish Department.
South Dakota.
Yep.
Yeah, so Miss Witness we have to blame.
Yeah. But then I was only in South Dakota for less than 2 years, and as it turned out, didn't know this, I'm living in pure South Dakota. The Minneapolis Tribune was looking for an outdoor writer who could do more than just write where the fish are biting. They wanted somebody who could talk to biologists and understand what they were saying, and so I got that job and been here ever since.
How do you sell? One of the things that I've noticed about the media is, for whatever reason, people that gravitate to the media generally aren't the same people that gravitate to the outdoors for whatever reason. There's a few fishermen, a few hunters, but in general, it's a different demographic for whatever reason. So you get to a sports department and you're in charge of the outdoors. The good news is they're going to lean on you and probably give you great independence. The bad news is sometimes you got to really sell your stories hard to let them know if they're important or not, because they may not see what you see. What was that like for you? Because many journalists face that challenge.
Well, you described it accurately. But my first boss, my first sports editor, Larry Batson, he's the one that hired me, and he pretty much gave me free rein. Listen, there was nobody on the sports staff that knew anything about the outdoors. So
that's a blessing and a curse. Yeah.
Really, whatever I said, they had.
That was it.
And then Larry Batson went on to something else. And then my next sports editor, I'll never forget this. He wanted to have lunch with the whole staff individually, So we went to lunch, just he and I, and we're sitting there talking. And he says, "Hey, listen, what are those ducks with the green heads?" I said to myself, I'm in trouble here.
Or either that, or he's going to leave you alone completely.
Yeah, you're right. There were only maybe a small handful of people on the Minneapolis Tribune staff that fished, and maybe 1 or 2 that even thought about hunting. Otherwise, they weren't into that.
And so begins this career where you're able to go out and pick your places and do your different things. Now, there are some things that are annuals. The upcoming fishing opener is one of them, where you go every year, I'm sure, to the governor's opener or somewhere akin to, but you're going to be out there telling a story. What does the Minnesota fishing opener mean to you?
Well, let me tell you, I've been to a half a century of them now. And as a writer, I describe it, in fact, I write about it in the book. It's a marvelous thing that Minnesotans do. It's in some ways, I think the fishing opener is a unifying, a bonding event. I mean, 500,000 people go to the lake on that particular weekend, and you build up for it, you get ready for it, and it's marvelous. A lot of states do not have that. Wisconsin has an opener, but it's nothing like Minnesota's. South Dakota doesn't have an opener. North Dakota doesn't have an opener. Iowa doesn't really have an opener. So it's unique to Minnesota. And I once wrote, Maxie, that in Minnesota, there are 3 major holidays: Christmas, New Year's, and opening day.
Opening day.
Exactly.
That relates. So what's your favorite opening day story in the book?
Well, I'm not going to talk about days of not catching much, although really there weren't that many, but I'm not going to brag or whatever. One of my favorite opening day stories, Maxie, it's also in the book, as it turns out. My dad started joining me and some of my brothers for the opener. It was special to them too. But along came cancer in my dad. He had cancer, and he went to Mayo Clinic, and they gave him 6 months to live, and this was in January. And then as April came along, he started calling me. He said, Ronnie, I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can make it. And but I said, well, you have to make it. And so he did show up, but he wasn't feeling too well. But then we got up there fishing, and he caught a big northern pike and won something. That particular picture is a Canadian northern pike, but it was one of his biggest. But and that's the last time he went fishing, and he told me that that'll be the last time I'll be fishing.
How old was he?
He was 86 when he died. So,
and he got to go fishing one more time with his kids. That's pretty good.
Yeah. And here's one you'd like, Wally Hilgenberg.
Yeah.
As you know, he was very ill.
Yeah.
And I took him with some help. Here's me walking Wally Hilgenberg down the banks of the river. There's this big linebacker, I'm helping him go down the banks of the river. He got in a canoe, and he could still cast really good, and he had a great day. And later, I went to his house to interview him as we'd filmed his fishing trip, and he too sat and looked at me and said, "Ron, you're going to be the last one I ever fished with," and he was right. So that's a good story. They're not all Malden.
No.
I've got some happy opening day stories too.
One of the things that you've seen is the evolution of, you mentioned your mother, but the number of female anglers now compared to when you first started is off the charts.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is that just exposure too? Is that what?
Well, I think it's evolution. It's been happening all across, and we have more women legislators now. We have, and that's wonderful. As you know, I raised 2 daughters. My wife and I raised 2 daughters. I remember telling them, girls, the fish don't know who's on the end, who's on the other end of the line. So you can catch fish as well as any boy or man can. And I think that was good advice. And I just got corrected. My dad wasn't 86, he was 68. I had reversed those. So 68.
So he was young.
Very young. My mother died at age 55. So.
Oh boy.
Life goes on, she told me.
But but that's why, to an extent, that's why you fish. That's why you hunt, right? Because it's one of those things that you can do with your family. It's one of those things that are memories for a lifetime. It's one of those rare things where if they like it enough, you may be able to get some quiet time with them that you can't get anywhere else, that they'll remember, you'll remember.
I remember I write about one moment in a place called Gordon's Woods, where my dad and I went squirrel hunting. We'd sit on a stump, and father, son, you can kind of talk about stuff that you wouldn't talk about when mom and the girls are around.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure. And I forgot to add, we also, as a family, hunted morel mushrooms in the spring. A lot of people, whoa. And then in the fall, we'd go hunt walnuts from walnut trees. I mean, the real thing, So I was definitely exposed to the outdoors, and I would wish that for everybody.
Big game. You've traveled the world, at least from here to the west part and overseas to hunt big game.
Well, I've never.
What's the thrill of big game?
Well, for me, well, of course, out west, lots of deer, and you have wide open spaces, and you can see forever, and there's a lot of game there. So you're seeing a lot of stuff. Doesn't mean you're going to get close to them. But I became also addicted to elk hunting, and
Why?
because my interest in calling wild turkeys. Well, you can also call in bull elk if you know what you're doing, and there's nothing that's a greater thrill than to hear a bull elk bugle in the mountains on a September morning, and you convince him that you're a cow looking for a little fun, and he'll come running in.
What a shock!
Yeah, what a shock! But
let the game begin, because that is difficult to do, right?
But getting back to big game, when I was the greatest squirrel hunter in Elmwood County, I would occasionally see a deer. You have to remember, way back in the late 50s, there weren't many deer in a lot of places. So I'd see one occasionally in the woods when I'm squirrel hunting. They were like a ghost. And so when I got to be like a senior in high school, I decided I was never going to shoot a deer with a gun until I was good enough to get one with a bow. What a dumb thing to do. So,
can't be that hard, right? Yeah.
It took me 5 years of hunting with a bow before I finally got one. And when I finally got one, it was like I was hunting for 20 minutes and I had a deer. So there you go.
Did you miss opportunities before then? Did you miss deer? Did you screw things up a few times before where you should have had a deer?
Oh yes. I didn't have anybody to teach me. My dad didn't hunt. He hunted with a gun. He knew nothing about bow hunting, and I didn't either. And so only until I got to college that I ran into a guy that bow hunted. He had the same passion as I did, and so he kind of took me under his wing. But there's one deer I'll never forget. He was humongous, huge rack. And I saw him coming across the field. He was chasing a doe. Well, the doe went one way. The buck came right down the path that I was sitting on the ground. And he came right up about 15 yards away and stopped. And I was ready for him. And I let the arrow go, and the arrow went right where I was looking. It clanged off his antlers, and I think he's still running.
So you had a good shot.
I had a good shot.
You actually hit it. Now, when you go to Montana, Colorado, those places, is the serenity of the mountains the same as the serenity of a good lake? Is there a lot of similarity there?
Oh my, yes, yeah. It's different scenery, of course, and you soon learn when you go to Colorado to hunt elk when you're at 7, 8, 9, 10,000, even 11,000 feet. You're not in as great shape as you thought you were, but that's part of the experience. The other thing, I mean, and hunting is hunting no matter where you go. There might be a lot of elk in the Colorado mountains, but that doesn't mean they're going to walk up and hop in your cooler. There was one year I think I saw more mountain lions than I saw elk, but that's the timing. I mean, those are things that are out of your control.
Yeah, and but what makes it fun more than anything, you write about this a lot, the anticipation of the hunt or the fish. Yes. When I say that word, the anticipation, when it's circled on your calendar and you're getting closer, that to me is half the victory. What does that mean to a good outdoors person?
In many ways, that's the bulk of the enjoyment, is that anticipation, as you well know, because you think all this is going to happen, and you're pumped for the moment. It's just like the walleye opener. You are anticipating that. You envision yourself being walleyes jumping in your boat, or you expect the deer and the elk to come right up to you. So yeah, anticipation is the wonderful thing. It's the greatest part of that.
as you peruse through, part of your job as a journalist was to hold people accountable for the outdoors, whether it was in governmental and when tax money was, in educating people who didn't understand what they thought they understood about the outdoors. Major victory, of course, to create a fund for perpetuity along those lines. But those battles, Ron Schara was never afraid to take on a government official or somebody that needed to know something or be debated. Was that satisfying to see progress made? Was that frustrating? What was that part of your job like?
Well, I would say it's mostly frustrating. I should back up. In some ways, it's frustrating. In other ways, it's gratifying. Um, and I write about some of those moments of boyhood where some of my boyhood haunts turned into junkyards on a trout stream, or the Gordon's Wood that I shot my first squirrel in is now a cornfield, things like that. Um, uh, but what I've learned is with the newspaper and covering a lot of sportsmen's groups, if they take it upon themselves to fix up their own backyard, that's really when things start to happen nicely. Minnesota deer hunters, for example, the Lake Superior Steelhead Association, Ducks Unlimited, the Wild Turkey Federation. When those organizations pick up a cause, they can move the needle in the legislature that most individual anglers or hunters can't do. So that's been very gratifying. I have a lot of hope for the future.
What did it mean though to have the Lasard bill go through? I mean, that was a campaign that was hard. That was, and people had to vote for it. If they didn't vote, it was a vote against it. So it was a laborious campaign to get it done. You guys went all over the state in junkets to get it done. You knew what it meant to this state. What does it mean to this state, to people so they give us tangible evidence of what they're experiencing now because of it?
Well, for folks that don't know or forgot, in about 10, 11 years ago, we went to the polls and voted to tax ourselves 3/16 of 1% added sales tax that would be dedicated by Constitution, by the way, to fish and wildlife habitat, clean water, parks and trails, and the arts. And just the fish and wildlife part of that now is 1/3 of that. And it amounts to a staggering any amount between $100 and $127 million a year.
A year.
A year. And what that money has to go on the ground. So as a result, the last 10 years, Minnesotans are going to see a lot of trout streams that are improved, that are great condition. The stream banks have been stabilized, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to see native prairie were restored where it wasn't so good. They're going to see wetlands restored that were drained who knows how long ago. As I like to say, this has been the greatest gift we Minnesotans have given ourselves. And to put it in the right way here, that increase in our sales tax amounted to this amount. When you buy something in Minnesota now for $10, you're paying 4 more cents than you normally would have. And that 4 cents is like magic. That 4 cents in a year amounts to $300 million. It's amazing. Wow. Yeah.
Well, now, how do you decide on projects once you have this windfall of money in this treasure chest? How do you decide what projects are done?
Well, organizations, individuals, government agencies come up with a project. They present the information to us, and they come. I'm on the Lasard Sam's Council. That's why I'm talking this way. They come before the council and describe their project, answer questions, and there's 12 people on this council, and we vet everything. And when you're dealing with public money, as you know, Maxie, you're almost overly cautious, which we are. And then we recommend or don't recommend, as the case might be, projects, and that's put into the form of a legislative bill, and then the legislature can approve it or not approve it. But they've so far have had total faith in what we decide, because they don't have time to ask all the questions, etc. So it's been a very good system. And I'll say this: when Bud Grant and I went around the state selling this thing at one point, and stop after stop, you'd have some people, and I don't blame them. They say, "Oh, this is just another way for the government to get more of my money," and the next thing you know, they're going to spend it on welfare or whatever. You know how that goes. But we assured them that it would be constitutionally protected, and that money has to go into fish and wildlife habitat. It can't go to pamphlets or anything else. It's got to go on the ground. So, and it does.
So if I hypothetically wanted a 1 acre, say about an acre near a river, and I grew corn on it, and I wanted to flood the corn and provide a safe haven for ducks to land. Why are you laughing? You've never been able to help me with it. Could I propose? Would I have to buy the land first, and then maybe ask for money to help flood it? What could I get done here?
Nothing.
Because it's me. Okay, let's say somebody else had the idea.
No, that wouldn't qualify. It would be a temporary habitat for one thing, and that wouldn't qualify.
I mean, you'd bring the binoculars out and watch these ducks as long as they didn't get in the way of my shot, you know?
If you had a wetland or two on your property that had been drained before you bought it,
okay,
you wanted to restore it, then you might be able to get some money.
Okay, so I need to prove that there was a depression there, or some kind of wetland, and then I might be able to roll with something.
There would be a historical record there.
Okay, so now if people want to jump on and chat with us, you can just hit the chat button there. If you've got a question or comment, we'll be happy to entertain them here in the second half hour with Ron Schara. New book, Minnesota Historical Society is the press behind it, and Ron Schara kicking off with his tour. Well, here's a question for us. It says, Ron's best columns were usually about relatives, especially the riveting fishing stories with his multi-talented brother. So I was wondering how he whittled down his favorite brother in columns to under a dozen. That's sent to us by Rick Schara. That's funny. He shared the same last name as you.
I don't even know who that is. He's trying to be funny. Some of this. Well, some of my fondest memories are fishing with Dad and brothers, and we mentioned that earlier. And that's part of the whole thing. You know, it's nothing individual there. I've also had, privilege to fish from everywhere from the Amazon River to the Arctic Circle. Everywhere you go in that outdoor arena, especially anglers and hunters, you just hang around with a lot of good people. Not that there aren't some dingbats out there, because there are, but I wouldn't trade my life for anything here. I even got to meet somebody like you, Maxie. So that's good.
We'll get to that when we get to the crescendo of this whole thing. But one of the things that you love to do, that really you talk about angling and big game, but what really got your gobble was turkey hunting. Why? How'd that happen?
Oh, man. It happened by accident, but I was working for the South Dakota Game and Fish Department, as I said, and Art Richardson, who was at the time is the deer and turkey biologist in the Black Hills, because I was editor of their magazine, he says, come on out and I'll introduce you to turkeys and turkey hunting. So I went out one April, and
you had no preconceived notion. You just said, let's go.
Yeah. And so I wanted to learn about it, who knows, maybe write about it. And got out there, and first morning, and he was on one side of the hill, I was on the other, and the turkeys came on my side. And the last bird through was a tom, and I raised my shotgun and got him, and I've been addicted and hooked ever since.
What was it? Was it the watching them? Was it the noise they make? Was it the what?
It's everything. And they're an amazing bird. And I was so inspired by them and intrigued by them. And you can talk to them. I have a little music in me, and so I was able to imitate their calls. And and they'd answer you. And it doesn't mean they'd always come in, but sometimes they did. And when they're strutting, when the sun rises shining on their breast, I mean, it's just an awesome thing to see. You never forget it. And by accident, I ended up starting a turkey hunting camp in the Black Hills of South Dakota. I'm living in Minnesota now, but
by accident.
I would invite a friend or two from Minnesota. I said, you gotta try turkey hunting. Minnesota didn't have turkey hunting back then.
Sure.
So you got to try this. So they'd come out to the Black Hills, and then they'd say, oh, that was awesome. I want to bring a couple of my buddies next year. I go, well, okay, yeah, let's do that. Well, then I couldn't guide them all, so I'd have to find a friend out there to guide them. And then, where are they all going to stay? So we rented a motel deal and made a kitchen out of it. And next thing I know, I have a turkey camp. And Maxie, it's now still going 45 years later. And
you were there last week.
Yeah, I was there last week. Yeah.
How did you do?
I got zipped.
That was another, just like the 45-year tradition.
Oh, I no.
Is it beautiful out there in the morning in the Black Hills?
Well, yeah, but it wasn't last week. It was weather from 14 above in the morning to 22, and then didn't get much above 35, 40 degrees all day. So it was snow still on the ground out there. So I was shocked, and I'm just making up excuses here, but I still love it. Had a great time, but that started it. And all these Minnesota guys that came out there, we said, we got to have turkeys in Minnesota. Minnesota they were trying, failing. It wasn't anybody's fault, but
yeah. Well, why? I mean, why would Minnesota not hold turkeys? Why did it take an initiative?
Well, they were stocking the wrong kind initially, and so they weren't doing well. They got some from Nebraska. Found out later they trapped them in a barn. They were half domesticated. It didn't work, and then finally, Minnesota put a deal together with Missouri to get this rough grouse for wild turkey, and they traded. Minnesota gave Missouri 5 rough grouse for 1 wild turkey. And I think we got 28 wild turkeys. They let them go down in Caledonia area, and that was the start of it. Well, in the meantime, this Minnesota conglomerate that came out to my camp, we formed the very first Minnesota National Wild Turkey Federation chapter in this state, and they named because I called the meeting, they made me the president. But then we raised money to help Minnesota DNR trap and transplant these birds. We did it for several years. We spent thousands of dollars to do that, and so consequently, turkeys were put in habitat all the way up. And frankly, they surprised everybody because at one point they thought, well, they'd never make it north of the Twin Cities.
And now look,
that's a joke.
I've seen 4 dead on the highway.
I know.
Those are just dead. And by the way, they taste pretty good if you cook them right.
Cut out the tired part.
But I mean, to think that I've seen 4 just dead birds.
Yeah.
And you see them, of course, so regularly now. Is that one of the greatest comebacks or introductions that you've ever seen to the wildlife?
Well, it's one of Minnesota's greatest conservation stories because turkeys, there's some dispute about whether they were ever native, but I think they were, at least in extreme southern Minnesota. But the last one supposedly disappeared in the 1880s, somewhere in there. And so they were gone almost.
Because they were being shot or what?
Well, yeah, there's no such thing as seasons back then.
Sure.
So pioneers and settlers, they were.
You see one, you shoot one. Yep.
Exactly. And then habitat declining, they cut down the forest and created fields, and that's not what turkeys needed. So they were gone from Minnesota for nearly a century. But now they're back, and there's some people in Edina are not so happy about that. They're chasing them down the street, but they'll get over it.
That's right. Now, people talk about Raven, you're synonymous with Raven, but Raven came about first because you decided to spread your wings, pardon the pun, and start a television show. Tell me what you're writing, and you're doing this for the Star Tribune, and it's not unusual for somebody from the newspaper to be on TV, but usually it's in a guest role. You decided to do it as the host reporter role. How did you come up with the idea? And then obviously it spawned to and it led to Raven. But let's start with how you got into television.
Well, I watched some of the outdoor shows on television, and most of them were "Watch Me Catch a Fish."
Yep,
and,
again and again and again, right? And repeat.
How many fish can you watch in a half an hour? And so I was always a fan of the 60 Minutes TV show where they were telling stories, and or 2020, some of those. So I says to myself, if I ever get a chance to do a TV show, I'm going to tell stories, and I'm going to make it a variety of stories. I'm going to tell stories about people, places, and adventures, etc. So that was the nucleus that started Minnesota Bound, and but nothing happened until I got a call one day from the news director at Carol Evan, who said he was an avid hunter and fisherman, and he called me one day and he said, "Hey, Ron, our sports guys, they never say anything about hunting, deer season, whatever." He says, "Would you come over and maybe do a couple of 1.5, 2 minute features for us?" So I went over and shot a pilot, and they liked it, and so I started doing weekly little outdoor pieces, and they called it Minnesota Bound, and one thing led to another, and the next thing you know, they said, "Why don't you do a half-hour show? You'll own it. We'll help you sell it," and the rest is history, Maxie. And then about Raven. So I've had labs for a long time, and in 1995, when we were filming the wraps for the first Minnesota Bound, show number 1 was we were in my kitchen. It was a February day and it was cold out. So I had a 6-month-old lab in the kitchen, and her name was Raven. She's black, she's birdie. I thought she was smart. And so ravens are one of the smartest birds in the bird world. So hence the name Raven. So we're trying to figure out what the set should look like. And finally my wife said, "Why don't you have Raven sit next to you?" So I brought her over there, and Joe Harowitz, my cameraman, said, "That doesn't work." I go, "What do you mean? It's a nice looking dog, Joe." He said, "Oh, it doesn't work. Is there something bright and colorful you can put on your dog?" And I go, I'm thinking to myself, Joe's from Pittsburgh. He thinks I dress up my hunting dogs. Oh my gosh. So I went down the hall of our house, and they're hanging what I used to call the old farmer's handkerchief, red handkerchief.
Sure.
I put it on the dog, walked back out there. Joe said, "That's perfect." And little did we know, we created this icon, instant icon, Raven, the black lab. And
But was the intent just to do it for one show and then you got a reaction, or what happened?
Well, I don't know if we thought that far in advance, but just for something to say at the end, I said, and the star of the show is Raven. And that just caught on with people. And she became an instant hit. Seriously. And then one thing led to another. Next thing you know, ESPN gets a hold of me, and they want to do they want an outdoor show like I was doing locally in Minnesota, storytelling. And they said, "We'll call it Backroads with Ron and Raven." I go, "Now I'm sharing equal billing with this damn dog, you know." But the rest is history. It was wonderful.
And the feedback that you would get, let's just say at the state fair or wherever you went, and of course everybody thought they were original when they asked you about Raven, even though you'd heard it 28 times. But what was that like when you'd be at the state fair and you bring Raven with?
It was magical. It was like, am I really seeing this? You know, people would stream over. We have a little Minnesota Bound cabin there up in the Northwoods. We had Raven on the north side of the cabin in a fenced area, so she could be comfortable there in the shade. And people would stream in there and stand there and just look at her. And I go, wow. She loved people, so she's getting up once in a while and licking hands, mostly looking for food, I think. But it was Maxie was unbelievable. And then we started raising some money for Pheasants Forever using little plush raven puppies and selling them. And we raised close to $50,000 doing that. And Pheasants Forever matched it a couple of times. And there's a wildlife area right now in Minnesota that will be dedicated to all the ravens, for all the money they helped raise for wildlife area. It's called the Two Rivers Wildlife Area. So it was amazing. But I'll tell you one quick story. So they weren't so interested in talking to me. So
right. Yep. I know. Yep.
Raven and I would do a dog act twice a day there. But so I'm done with the dog act. I kind of move way over and get in the shade and get a comfortable chair. And there were a couple of little old ladies come wandering by, and they saw me over there, and they go, "Oh, Mr. Schara, do you feel bad because everybody's going to see the dog and they're not even looking for you?" I go, "Well, I'm used to it now. I'm over it. It's okay." And "Well, hope you don't feel too bad." I said, "Ladies, come here." I said, "I don't feel too bad." "Why is that?" I said, "Because the checks come to me."
And Raven doesn't even know what he's doing for me.
I never told her.
You had several ravens.
I had 3 ravens.
Being a dog owner is a wonderful thing in this world. Losing a dog is an awful thing. You and Bud Grant have talked about that. It's in your book.
I write about that.
Yes, grieving the loss of a dog is not lost on you.
Well, I had 3 of those to go through because those ravens put me on the map. They really were part of, I think, the joy of Minnesota Bound. There's no doubt about it. Nobody else was doing that at the time, although Jerry McInnes had a little tiny wiener dog that he used in his show. But yeah, it was something, and gut-wrenching. And but all the ravens were mother-daughter, and the last one died when she was 13. She died a year ago in February, and died peacefully. Died with flute music, Indian flute music playing, and a little, what do you call it, whipping in the air there. And in the night, just called it quits.
What do you tell people about that, about being a dog owner and it being worth the pain of, even if you have to see the end of their life?
Well, my goodness, but there's so much joy too. And they become part of the family. I mean, life goes on. I mean, this is the way it is. If you want to protect yourself, I guess go live in a closet and don't ever have a dog. So you do think about that, but I don't think I'd take another puppy right now, but my lifestyle is such that it would be more difficult. My daughter Simone has a couple of labs that I'm allowed to take pheasant hunting. So I still have I wouldn't even think of going pheasant hunting without a dog or grouse hunting. It's just, they add so much to it.
Once you hunt with the dog, upland game, it's pretty hard to do it any other way, isn't it?
It is, and but in the book I do write about saying goodbye. Some tips that I got from Dr. Norb Epping, who was a veterinarian for all my ravens. And the thing that he told me that was most impressive is he said, many times the dog will let you know. And he also said, when you finally realize your dog isn't enjoying life anymore, that's the time, because you do have that ability to take them out of their misery, so to speak.
And they're done that. Yep. Now, your 2 daughters you mentioned earlier both enjoy the outdoors. They fish, they hunt, probably have different favorites of the 2 in terms of what they enjoy doing. What has that done to enhance your relationship with them?
Oh my, it's given us a lot of memories.
I mean, and they have, and by the way, there's no guarantee for any parent that introduces their kids to the outdoors that their kids are going to enjoy it, right? So you have to accept that going in.
Oh, absolutely. Like I told him at the beginning, the fish don't know who's holding the fishing rod, and but when they were little tykes, they would tag along, walk behind me and the dogs while we were pheasant hunting, and I'd have them. If I get a bird, one of them or both of them would have to carry one, I had no idea that this was, uh, getting them going in this arena. Now Simone there on the right is quite a dog whisperer herself these days, and actually trains puppies for Tom Dock and give him some social things. Laura is she didn't go on the hunting dog route. She's got Bacon, the French bulldog, but Laura loves to fly fish and chase muskies. Laura is always wants the hard thing first. She wants topwater bass. That was her first goal. I want to catch a bass on topwater, Dad. And she's telling me this when she's 12 years old. And then now as she's gotten older, it's, I want to catch a muskie. So I go, well, wait a minute. A muskie is one of the hardest things to catch.
Let's start with sunnies, yeah.
Yeah, stick with sunfish. Something your dad can help you with.
If you could pick one place to fish, what would you fish for and where would it be?
No, that's a tough one, Maxie. Minnesota's blessed with so much great water. One of my favorites, of course, is Lake of the Woods. It's
for walleye, or not always.
Well, Lake of the Woods is a class lake for walleye, of course.
Good muskie factory too, though. Don't sell that short.
Exactly, muskies, smallmouth bass, and big northern pike. I mean, what more can you ask for? But Mille Lacs right now is still a wonderful lake. It's got all these regulation issues which baffle me, but it's still a wonderful walleye lake and has become a world-class smallmouth bass lake. What's interesting is the Twin Cities has about 20 lakes that are good fishing lakes around us here. And I always told people, the bass don't know they're living in the city, okay? So they're all right. And Lake Minnetonka, despite the boating and the people, etc., is still a mighty good fishing lake,
If you could only hunt and fish and you based where you lived on hunting and fishing, would it be North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, or you could maybe throw in a western state of Montana or Colorado, one of the above? Which one would it be? If it was only based on hunting and fishing.
It would be here.
Really?
Montana's wonderful, South Dakota's wonderful, North Dakota, wonderful, but I would miss the lakes. Minnesota and their lakes, and we may not have pheasant hunting like South Dakota, but we still have some pretty good pheasant hunting. We have really good deer hunting. We have some of the best ruffed grouse hunting in America, and waterfowl numbers are down a little bit, but Minnesota is still a great outdoor place to be. And I've often thought about that. Where would I go where would I go? And I keep saying, I can't leave Minnesota except maybe January, February, March.
You of all people going to Palm Spring in the winter has always amazed me, because I can't think of someone that would be bored quicker in Palm Springs than you.
I know, Maxie, you're a married man. Sometimes you don't make all these decisions.
Or any of them.
Or any of them.
Speaking of which, your wife you met not through the outdoors, but through music. She's a beautiful lady, Miss North Dakota, and it just befuddles me that she would want to marry you, date you, let alone marry you.
It amazes me too.
Take me back to your days. People might not know this. The lounge lizard of North and South Dakota when you were singing. I think that's what they called you. But you were in a band or a choir, depending on how you look at it.
Well, we didn't call them choirs, Maxie. This was called the Edgewater 8 singing group that performed 6 nights a week at the Edgewater Inn up on northeast Minneapolis on Lowry, right next to the Mississippi River. And that's a part, I put this in the book.
6 nights a week?
6 nights a week, yeah.
Holy cow.
I put this in the book because it was part of my life, and it always throws people for a curve because you go, hey, you're this, you're this bloodthirsty hunter. You're going to get up there and sing a song. Well, you know what? Music was part of my life all through my high school and college days. I played trumpet and professionally, et cetera, and I sang professionally. And so just by chance, I went to McPhail College of Music, so I knew some people in town. When I came to Star Tribune to start my job, somebody said to me, hey, you could get a singing job too if you wanted. And so I auditioned there, and I'm a single guy, whatever, and I got the job singing with the Edgewater.
6 nights a week, though, seems like that'd be pretty taxing to try to hold down a full-time job too.
Well, I did it by phone like they're doing today. And but also what was interesting, between shows, I'd grab a fishing pole and walk down to the Mississippi and make a few casts. I never caught anything, but I got my itch scratched a little bit. But that was it. That was part of.
But where did you meet your wife?
Well, I was dating one of the girls in the show. And,
what a shock.
Yeah, and she she said, hey, I've got this girlfriend of mine coming from North Dakota to spend the weekend with me. Can you find a date for her? I only knew a couple of single guys at the paper, so I asked both.
And one was Sid Hartman, so that was out.
So he was out, and I couldn't find anybody. So I told my girlfriend at the time, I said, I can't find anybody. So she said, I wasn't in the show at that point. So she said, well, you take Denise, show her around town. Because I knew all the hot spots. I knew where all the live music was. So I took her there. We danced a little bit, and the rest is history.
No, it's not. Who was the one that told the friend that she was no longer part of the Edgewater 3?
Well, I think she was ready to get rid of me anyway. So,
so that was it? The short version?
What's that?
That's the short version.
That's the short version, yeah.
But you had to go back and tell your original date that she was not your original date anymore.
Well, I didn't have to do that because my original date was, finally said, I think she's had enough of me too. So when that happened, I wrote a letter to the University of North Dakota asking this Denise Fletterman lady for a date. And I didn't know her address or nothing. I just said her name, University of North Dakota, Grand Forks, and wrote a letter, and didn't hear. I thought, well, there goes another deal. And then I got a letter, and it just so happened that I was going to go to North Dakota to write some pheasant hunting stories.
Yeah, once you got the letter, it just so happened.
I came through Grand Forks, and we had our first legitimate date, and I was so enraptured, I forgot my pheasants in a freezer up there. So I had to go back to get them the next weekend. See how
you pulled that trick?
That was an old trick. It worked, though.
It worked, man. What was it like in terms of thrills when you got the call, kind of out of the blue, and you didn't know, you pick up the phone, you don't know who's on the other line, and you find out that Mike Max is interested in having you on his outdoor show? What was that like for you? You must remember the moment, what it felt like. Is that when you say, man, I arrived? Is it what? And don't leave out any of the details.
I said, who's Mike Max? Oh, we did that show for a long time, actually, and I enjoyed it.
Get back.
And we got to get back doing something like that. But no, I enjoyed our time. We kid each other, and we have a question here, Maxie. Oh,
how difficult was it to step away from Minnesota Bound? Did you feel like it was time and you were ready to go? That from Beth Eckhart Hargerton.
Well, thank you, Beth, for the question. Yes and no. It was difficult, but I'm no spring chicken anymore, and life goes. It was time to turn it over to younger people. And
do you miss it or not?
well, I still do a lot. I still
I
write.
know. That's why I can't quite figure out what you really retired from.
Well, I don't even like the word retire. So I just had a wild turkey special on 2
Right.
weeks ago.
So I don't know what this retirement thing is, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, and so waiting in the wings was Bill Shirk, a guy that I hired years ago, very confident, and then daughter Laura is a natural in front of the camera. So and Raven was really getting old, and we didn't want to go until that moment, and so we turned it over to them. And but I still have something to say about the show. I still write some scripts, still do some stories, and I like that.
As a writer, this from Kelly, which do you like better, writing for print or writing for TV?
You know, that's a good question. What I like to tell people, when you're writing for a newspaper or magazine, you've got the written word and you have still pictures. That's wonderful. And the written word is very powerful regardless. But when you're writing for TV, you have the written word, you have the voices of other people, you have voices, your voice, and you have moving pictures, and you have music. So it's like directing a huge symphony, and it's so powerful that way. And
Yep.
and you still have the written word. So there you go.
Yeah, and when you see a quote, that's one thing. When you see somebody say it, you go on, I trust that person, I don't trust that person, I like that person. It's much more powerful than a quote.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Television, very powerful. And yes, I mean that's it. But
This comes from Amy. She says the funniest trip and the scariest fishing trip.
well, the funniest trip and the scariest fishing trip. Oh boy, the scariest fishing trip. When did I sink a boat here? I'm trying. The funniest trip. Oh boy, they kind of caught me here. The funniest one. Hmm, well, I don't know. Last year, walleye opener, my daughter Simone outfished me. I go, "What is that all about?"
Well, that's not funny though. That's
Well,
scary. Which one is it? Is it the scary or the funny?
That's scary too. Well, here, one of the scariest fishing trips I had was in the Amazon when we were catching piranha, and my friend caught one and was holding it at the end of the line, and the piranha flipped, and their teeth are like razor blades, and when it flipped, it wasn't really trying to bite him, but it just flipped up, and the tooth hit the end of his finger and took off an eighth of an inch of his finger, just like that.
Oh,
But the other thing about piranha that I was not aware of is that they taste as good as bluegills, so they're really good.
well, I talked about going fishing for piranha one time, and I said, "How do you know if they're in the area or not?" Because I've never fished for them before. And he said, "Just stick your hand in the water," and he said, "You'll find out one way or the other." But getting back to, did you know how funny I was on the radio before you started with me, or is that why you took the job?
Actually, this is supposed to be about my book.
I assume there's a chapter about that in there. I just assume.
Yeah, it's way back here. No, we kid each other a lot. A lot of people, if they don't know that, they maybe know it by now. But I'm truly very affectionate of you, and
Yeah, same here. Doggone it.
and
I miss you.
your sense of humor is very, very good most of the time. Not
I
all.
miss, I really miss. I miss when we go on location to the sports show. These things that haven't existed for a long time now because of COVID. When we go out to the sports show and all that stuff, those were fun times because everybody's in a good mood and it's such a positive gathering, you know?
Yeah, indeed. So,
Ron, we're about to wrap it up, but if people want to find this book, where do they find it?
well, there's a couple of locations. One is the Minnesota Historical Society Press and their website. The other is outdoorcalendars.com. That's my calendar website. We have the ability to sell the book there. It's also, hardly anybody goes in bookstores now, but we hope to be selling them at the state fair, and game fair will be coming up as well. and hopefully we'll get the word out.
Now, if they'd like an autographed copy, is there a way, or if they prefer a higher value, they just want one without an autograph?
I'm not Sid. I autograph them free. So, no, but thank you, Maxie, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
All right, my friend. And remember, introduce what? End it with your tagline.
Introduce a kid to the great outdoors.
Ron Schara, book coming near you soon. Historical Society Press is putting it together. Fun hour. I miss this guy. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did.